I'm not giving up.
I am selling the building.
The final season of FX's The Bear.
The restaurant is flooded.
Everything's either gonna be okay.
No, stop!
Or not.
We are outgunned and we are outmanned, but we have each other.
FX's The Bear, the final season. All episodes now streaming on Disney+.
Study and play come together on a Windows 11 PC. And for a limited time, college students get the best of both worlds. Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
There is a dwarf star of some sort orbiting the sun, upsetting the balance of the celestial mechanical balance of it. And that makes a difference. You say, well, what's the difference one way or another? There's precession. It does make a difference actually in the big picture, because it means that our solar system basically conforms with all of the other solar systems, which mostly are dual in nature. Sirius, for example, has the dwarf star that circles around at Sirius B. That's responsible for all sorts of measurable phenomena. So it starts off from there, but then the ancient knowledge comes in, because precession, and this is a big mystery, precession seems to be a factor of virtually every ancient society, be it sophisticated, a la China and India, South America, Mesoamerica, or so-called primitive, a word I hate to use. It simply means unintellectualized or not expressed in coherent Western philosophy, for whatever that's worth. But precession is a known fact, discovered actually a long time ago. You'd think by now it would be common knowledge and everybody would teach it in school, which is a sort of a joke.
It's kind of interesting that people don't teach it, right? It is a very bizarre thing that it's so prominent in ancient cultures and ancient society that they literally map this out, this 26,000-year cycle, this wobble of the earth, and that we rarely talk about it, ever.
No, because it upsets the notion that there's a knowledge of this going back to ancient times, presupposes that there's a very advanced observational astronomy dating at a time when supposedly people were still living in trees. So this is actually a big deal, hence the conference on precession. And the ancient knowledge comes into it because understanding that there is a highly sophisticated scientific understanding that goes back not just to ancient Egypt itself, but far thousands and thousands millennia beyond, upsets what is effectively the reigning religion of today, except it doesn't call itself a religion. It calls itself science, which is based supposedly on reason. It's not. None of those things are true. It's not based on science, and science is not based upon reason. Maybe we'll get time.
Well, some sciences, but archaeology in particular is very rigid in its ideas, and a lot of it is based on the professors that have written books and that teach these ideas, and they don't want to let them go. And when new knowledge is discovered that challenges those ideas, they fight it rigorously, even if it's knowledge like the stuff that you exposed with Dr. Robert Schoch, which was the water erosion on the Sphinx, which we were talking about before the podcast, which is one of the best pieces of evidence, because the last time there was rainfall, heavy rainfall in the Nile Valley was, what was it, 9,000 BC? Is that what it was?
They debate it, but it's way before the beginning of dynastic Egypt. And then it's a question of how old or when those rains fell. Because interesting bit of thing here that I'm now at liberty to relate publicly. Originally, I wasn't. When I first got Schoch over to Egypt, which is another 2-hour podcast in itself, the history of getting Schoch interested in this stuff. And when he finally agreed, very hesitantly and very skeptically, to come along because he had to see the evidence for himself, and I scraped together a bit of money to bring him over, and we got into the Sphinx enclosure. I don't think it was got in legally. I think we bribed our way in very early in the morning. Well, in Egypt, everything is possible. And bribed our way in, and he walked into the Sphinx enclosure. Actually, when we get that up on the screen, you'll see the you'll see the level of the water, or the extent of the weathering, of the water weathering. And Chuck looked at it, and everybody else walks into the Sphinx enclosure and has this shock of recognition in the presence of this fabulous work of sacred sculpture, in fact, of sacred sculpture. And Shock looked, but Shock is a no, that's not it. We're way back, Jamie, right to the beginning, first slides. And Shock, everybody else sees the Sphinx as a work of art. Shock sees the rocks, and he's a geologist. And he back like this, and he said, wow, these rocks look like they're hundreds of thousands of years old. And he said, don't quote me on that, because that's, of course, absolute heresy, that the most spectacular sculpture on Earth should be, tens of thousands of years. Actually, even the 4,500 years that it's associated with do not conform with anybody's idea of how civilization developed. This goes back to of why the academic, I call it the quackademic establishment, is so passionately defends the old paradigm the way that it does, because the reigning paradigm, the reigning religion today, which is not acknowledged as religion, is that this is the Church of Progress. And its credo, just like the virgin birth is the credo of early Christianity, or present-day Christianity, not that they know what they're talking about. The credo of the Church of Progress is, we are the most sophisticated human beings that have ever lived on the face of the planet, with our hydrogen bombs and our nerve gas and our striped toothpaste and our Disneylands. We're the best that ever was. And secondly, that progress, as it's called, goes in a straight line from primitive cavemen up to ourselves. And when it becomes self-evident that in very, very ancient times, they had knowledge of precession, which is an incredible thing it's almost unimaginable that it happens through careful observation, because the sun, I don't know if all of the audience will know what this is, so maybe it's worth talking about. The sun, if you look at the spring equinox now, it's in the sun is rising against the last bits of Pisces. It may even be in the earliest stages of Aquarius. And gradually the sun precesses, that's to say, it goes backwards around the zodiac in a cycle that takes 25,920 years to make a complete circle. What this means is that it actually takes 72 years, precisely, for the sun to precess 1 degree. So this is nothing. Who's going to be sitting there for 72 years watching the track of the sun in a cycle that takes 26,000 years to go around?
And observe that there's a discrepancy there, write it down, and pass that information down.
And then why should they care? It's somehow or another deeply connected with the civilization of that time and with our civilization. And when you look at the numbers involved, this is another hours of conversation, actually. Right. The 72 and the 73 are significant numbers in practically all of the developed numerologically based societies. So in Egypt, Set, who's the bad guy, derivative, probably Satan is derived from Set. He's the bad guy, but he's also a great god. That is to say, the gods are not gods in any superstitious fashion. They represent the embodiments of cosmic principles. So, Set is he who fixes spirit and matter. And the whole basis of any esoteric doctrine, including most of the religions that are around even today in their depraved forms, the objective of any esoteric discipline is to free ourselves individually and collectively from our imprisonment in matter. This is the quest for immortality. And so in some sense or another, that precessional cycle is very important, and the numbers are important. In the myth, which again we don't have time for, but Osiris is the good king. Actually, this is all very carefully expounded, very brilliantly, in fact, in the Hamlet myth, which becomes Shakespeare's Hamlet. And then in The Lion King, in Disney's Lion King, in the movie especially, which is really pretty brilliant. Anyway, Set is the good king who is beloved by his people, and Set is his wicked brother, his evil brother, who's determined to unseat him and steal his sister wife Isis while he's at it. Anyway, Set sets a trap for Osiris, and it's Set and his 72 followers. So 72 is this number associated with time, and the 72 to 73 is a very significant ratio, actually, which pervades the philosophies of as I said, of all of the esoteric civilizations. So all of this stuff, instead of being the kind of ask a quackademic, the same guy you were talking about earlier, who still thinks the Sphinx is weathered by sand, ask one of those what ancient myth is about. They say, oh, well, it's just a fabrication written by primitive people who are trying to explain the mysteries of the universe. It's the other way around. The primitive people are the ones with the PhDs. And back then, they not only did they understand these scientific, these astronomical facts, but they orchestrated their whole civilization around those facts. And the deeper you get into this, the more miraculous the extent of ancient knowledge becomes.
Now, what is the mainstream explanation when they talk about the prevalence of the number 72 and their understanding of the precession of the equinoxes? Do they address it at all? Like, how do they sort of explain how they knew about this 26,000-year cycle?
There's a very quick answer to that, actually, for a change. No, they don't explain.
They don't.
They just ignore it.
Is it sort of like the Parthenon, the Acropolis? You know, which one? The Acropolis is the building, and the Parthenon's the structure, right? Is that what it is?
No, both are temples, both are buildings.
But what is what's the base? The base is the one that they don't explain, right? They just go, well, we don't really exactly. That's the gigantic, enormous base, the huge stones that the Acropolis is built on, right?
I don't know.
Which one is the Acropolis? I always screw those up.
Acropolis is the one on top.
Right. Okay. See, the Parthenon is what they're built on. This the base structure, or whatever it is, the bottom area.
I don't know, actually. I've never really looked that deeply into it, other than that there's a friend of mine who's worked with the proportions and the sophisticated proportions of the Parthenon, and it shows actually that it's as minutely orchestrated as anything in Egypt, even though it's much later than Egypt. But
much later than Egypt, but no one knows who built it, and no one knows why they built it. It's one of those weird ones where it's not really described in the text, and the Acropolis is built upon it. At least that's been explained to me by Greek historians, by people who understand Greek history. They just really don't understand where it came from.
Well, I believe that's true, except that I think it's pretty certain that it's not of Egyptian age, although if you're talking about gigantic paving stones at the bottom of it, as I said, I don't know.
Yeah.
But whenever you see those gigantic stones, that's a pretty good indication of an earlier period of construction. As at Baalbek, they have these monolithic 1,200-ton blocks that they think the Romans put in there.
And that's in Lebanon, right?
That's Lebanon, yeah. So there's a ton of this kind of indirect evidence, and when you put it all together, there's enough of a picture there so that it overthrows the basis. As I said, what's important about it is, in one sense, who cares? In another sense, it overthrows the supposed scientific basis of the Church of Progress, that we're the most sophisticated people that ever were, and we can do whatever we please with this once glorious planet of ours without worrying about it, because we're the best and everyone before us was primitive.
Well, there's a lot of new evidence now since you started your work, particularly all that nuclear glass that they're finding that corresponds with meteor impacts throughout Europe and Asia, and that's somewhere around the end of the Ice Age, really in the same sort of time period when they do core samples, and they find this nuclear glass. It's all at around 10,000 plus years ago. That kind of stuff really starts to indicate that we're looking at possibly an event that might have shaped human history, or a reset of a large percentage of the people on this planet, where civilization in many areas was all but wiped out, and then they had to rebuild again.
Yeah, this is coming to the fore now. There's a lot of evidence for these, I think it's the tektites they're called. Schock thinks that they are the result of a gigantic CME, a coronal mass ejection, giant solar flares. And there's a lot of evidence for this. Actually, if we get into talking about it here, I will at CPAC for sure. Schock will be at CPAC. Anyway,
When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
Tomorrow morning is knocking. Stock your fridge now. How about a creamy mocha frappuccino drink? Or a sweet vanilla? Smooth caramel maybe? Or a white chocolate mocha? Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Find Starbucks Frappuccino drinks wherever you buy your groceries.
It's unlikely that it's actually a nuclear blast, because it would be inconceivable at least by our standards, a man-made nuclear blast. Although, when you go into the Hindu texts, and I think it's the Upanishads where they describe what sounds like, it's described as a battle of the gods, but for all the world, it does sound like a nuclear conflagration. A human-made nuclear conflagration. I don't think anybody knows enough to say what it is, other than that story is in there.
Right.
In fact, because I'm a writer by trade, I'm very interested in the way that language is used, and so myth is one of the principal misleading words that, if you look in the dictionary, the first meaning that it gives for myth is a lie. You would talk about the myth, Mythbusters, ghost, and myth is a lie. But the ancients didn't see myth as a lie. What myth actually is, when you get into it fairly deeply, is the interplay of cosmic principles described as drama rather than in mathematics. So once you get a good look at this, is an extraordinary but opaque book called Hamlet's Mill by Giorgio de Santillana and Herta von Deckent, who were historians of science at MIT, which is about as respectable as credentials can be. So as soon as myth is understood as having both a rigorous scientific as well as philosophical and spiritual base, the whole understanding of myth turns around. And you see, for example, in Shakespeare's Hamlet, which is based upon a Danish folk tale, which then becomes, quite brilliantly actually, the Lion King in the Disney film. You see how the myth, in other words, you could decode the Osiris-Isis-Horus myth as pure science, and you might call it as spiritual or as sacred science. And at the same time, it's a ripping good story when you put it that way, as story, because then everybody can understand it, even if they don't understand it, or even if they can't articulate what they've understood. The power of the story soaks through. So myth is actually, the more you know about it, in my case it's not that much, but at least it's better than nothing. The more you know about it, the more amazing mythology becomes, that they should have been able to put together these complex, hierarchical, esoteric concepts in a way that resonates as a story. Otherwise, insofar as, our own cosmology is next to impossible to understand unless you're a cosmologist and schooled in the abstract mathematics that make the thing work. I can't, the mathematics is absolutely beyond me, but some of my astrophysicist friends can explain it to me in such a way that I understand, but it still doesn't have any emotional impact.
So essentially what you're saying is that they didn't have the sort of scientific discipline that we have today. They didn't understand a lot of the things that we know today as far as the way academics or scientists relay information about space or about cosmology. So what they did is they combined theater and story with the actual facts that they knew. So that was the way they would relay this stuff, and that's the way that stuff would be passed on, that information would be passed on through these stories. But in those stories was an actual history of the world itself, as far as they knew.
Through that and through symbolism. And this is an infinitely superior way of communicating knowledge, because you don't have to be an expert. It soaks into your bones in such a way that it directs personally and collectively people's behaviors. And it's my firm conviction that this is why Egypt lasted as a coherent civilization, even in its dynastic form, for 3,500 years, and our lunatic societies coming apart at the seams in front of our eyes at 300 years.
I wanted to talk to you about the written history of Egypt and the hieroglyphic history of the pharaohs. Because I remember, I think it was from Magical Egypt 1, you were talking about the historical record, like what they have written down in the hieroglyphs about the pharaohs, that it goes back far beyond what we think of as the birth of Egypt. You know, with the construction, the Great Pyramid, I believe modern academics put it at 2,500 BC, correct?
Yes.
And you believe that it's possible that Egypt existed as far back as, I think you said 34,000 years?
Well, that's that's the Egyptians' account, not mine.
Right.
As expressed in a stone tablet called the Palermo stone, because it's now in Palermo, Italy, and in a very fragmentary papyrus called the Turin papyrus, which is now in Turin. And both of these documents, one is a stone stela and the other is a papyrus, tell or recount long periods when Egypt was ruled first by the Netcheru, which means the gods themselves, which I take to mean fully realized divine human beings. In other words, human beings that have attained, that have passed the test of the quest for immortality, who are in effect, they've outsmarted death, or they've outdeveloped death.
Why do you believe this?
Because their works speak for themselves, as it were, and the level of now we're talking going back even to dynastic Egypt, because the temples themselves and the level of art involved, particularly in the sculpture, is such that standard, I'd say genius is rare enough, but standard human genius doesn't seem to apply to these incredible constructions. And the academics simply dismiss it out of hand as really very talented exponents of a barbaric and primitive understanding of the cosmos. Leading my trips there, which I do, as you know, a few times a year. Next one coming up, by the way, anybody listening in.
How can people go on one of those trips with you?
Oh, it's very easy to pay.
Okay. Where do they find you, though?
On my website.
JohnAnthonyWest.com?
Yeah, on the website or my email, jawsphinx@aol.com.
Oh, you messed up. You gave out your email. That's a disaster.
Is it?
My people, horrible people. We're going to send you naked pictures, for sure.
Oh, not of themselves, I hope, but I...
Are you familiar with the term dick pic?
I am now.
Yeah, there you go. So your thoughts are that these people that lived 34,000 years ago were incredibly advanced,
yes,
like much further advanced than we are today.
Which doesn't take much, but
right,
when you understand what's involved. But
yeah, I know what you're saying, but I mean, we're pretty damn advanced compared to people a few hundred years ago. Correct?
In certain ways we are, but
right,
we still can't. We couldn't and wouldn't build the Cathedral of Chartres.
Mm-hmm.
There's nobody alive, to the best of my knowledge, who could produce a building that is based upon sacred principles that even comes close to...
You mean sacred geometry?
And sacred, even that. I mean, a few people really know quite a bit about this, but they couldn't design Chartres. And that's 12th century.
Anyway, what was it about Egypt in that time in particular that, in your opinion, I mean, obviously there's a lot of speculation going on here because there's so little evidence from 34,000 years ago, but what is it about that area that you think developed people at such an incredibly high level? Because unless there's more evidence to be found, there doesn't seem to be any parallels anywhere else in the world like that one spot.
Actually, there's a fairly simple explanation for that, for a change, because most of the stuff is so complicated. But just to go back a bit to the rule by the Neteru, the gods themselves, and the names of those rulers are given, and the length of time that they reigned. And then there's another group of
the line of time is incredible, right?
Well, this is where we're getting the 34,000, 36,000 BC from.
Yeah,
because you add the times up. The Turin Papyrus has a similar thing of the reign, rule of the Neteru, and the rule by that's called the Shemsuhor, the followers or the followers of the companions of Horus. And again, the names are given and the regnal years, and when you add those all up together, you get around 36,000 BC.
But weren't I'm sorry to interrupt you, but weren't some of the pharaohs, didn't they live hundreds of years?
There's no evidence for that.
But wasn't it written that they did?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what those dates are, actually. I've not actually deeply researched them. I get those figures from Schwaller de Lubix, the great genius with the unpronounceable name, who put together the whole interpretation of symbolist Egypt, from which my work is derived. I regard myself as Schwaller's Boswell, making his basically impenetrable work accessible to
dummies like me.
No, smart guys like you, not dummies like politicians and quackademics. No.
So, but when you're talking about 34,000 years, I mean, the average person today lives to be about 80 years. You're talking about an incredible number of pharaohs then.
Yeah, you are. Yes.
But and so all of that is depicted?
Apparently the names are given. I get that from Schwaller, from the one long chapter he wrote called the chronology, chorography, he called it. There's not the word for it, but the chronology of Egypt, where he's looking to back up from a scholarly point of view, from the scholarly argument, that the Egyptians knew what they were talking about when they were assigning these long reigns, that these are not fictitious. This is not made-up history in order to, fool the people who couldn't read the hieroglyphs anyway. Only the scribes could read the hieroglyphs. So Schwaller wrote this very long and thoughtful and scholarly chapter, and then at the very end of it, this throwaway line, and as of course the Great Sphinx of Giza has been weathered, shows unmistakable signs of aquatic erosion. And that was my little epiphany, because I picked up on that and said, wow, the rest of this isn't science, but that's geology. And if the geologists can be, will agree that this cannot have taken place since 2,500 BC, when the Sphinx is supposedly built, this will upset the whole paradigm. All of civilization will have to be, of our view of civilization, will have to be rethought. And that's began this long, now 4-decade-long quest to find somebody to back it up. And we're now, my sense of it is, closing in on beating down the opposition. And this will be another thing, actually, in fact, I'll probably be talking about at CPAC, but probably with, shall we say, a little bit more politely than I feel it necessary to talk about here. I'm here with you. And that is riffing on a line that probably everybody who tunes into this is familiar with. Victor Hugo, the French poet, novelist, a dramatist of the 19th century. Actually, France's most popular poet of the 19th century was Victor Hugo. And it was Victor Hugo who wrote the famous line, "There's one thing stronger than all the armies in the world, and that is an idea whose time has come." You know that line, right?
Yeah.
Everybody knows that line. But what Victor Hugo didn't think of, or if he did, he didn't express it, was that the second strongest thing in the world is an idea whose time has not yet gone. And since it is a matter of record that all of the armies in the world, be they military, economic, financial, cultural, agricultural even, wherever there's a paradigm, there's an army devoted to protecting that paradigm. And this is where we stand now, that the idea whose time has come only comes when the armies of the second strongest thing in the world are beaten down, are beaten into the ground, and somebody breaches the portcullis to the ivory tower where all of these guys live. And this is of particular interest to me because I am a scholar by default, but a satirist by nature. And really my whole adult life has been devoted to proving a vision that I had at the age of 13 or so, that I was born into a lunatic asylum. And at the age of about 19, it was a very uncomfortable place to live where everybody called it progress. And I thought it was crazy. And at that age, about 19 or so, I knew what I wanted to do, which was to be the little boy who said the emperor has no clothes, and to prove to everybody's satisfaction that indeed the emperor has no clothes and it's a lunatic asylum. The end result took me a couple of decades to realize that. It was that in real life what happens is that, no, the people all done say, whoa, look, the emperor has no clothes, and everybody lives happily ever after. What happens is that the disgraced emperor goes back to his palace and regroups the empire, and at the end, all of the forces of empire conspire to prove to everyone that the emperor's clothes are real, but it's the child who's imaginary.
El 2026 FIFA World Cup Meal llegó a McDonald's con 9 vasos legendarios. En el lineup tenemos Christian CP10 Pulisic, David Beckham, Lamine The Dream Yamal, Ronaldinho El Mago, Monsieur Titi Henry, Son Salih Heung-min, Alfonso Fonsi Davis, Santi Bebote Jiménez y en la portería el que no necesita apodo, Grimes.
Llévate uno de 9 vasos legendarios con el FIFA World Cup Meal. En McDonald's participantes solo por tiempo limitado, hasta agotar existencias.
Do you hear that? Sounds like breakfast is ready. Because Quaker's coming in hot with morning nutrition. 100% whole grain oats and a good source of fiber to fuel the rhythm of your morning and kickstart your day. And that sounds absolutely delicious. Fuel to start whatever's next. Quaker, official sponsor of FIFA World Cup 26.
We were talking about this before the podcast, and this is a really fascinating aspect of this discussion. Was when I first became aware of your work was that Charlton Heston narrated documentary about the aging of the Sphinx, the mystery of the Sphinx, which I believe was on NBC. What I thought was shocking was when Dr. Shock was speaking to that Egyptologist who was saying, what evidence is there of a culture that existed 7,000 years before ancient Egypt? There's no evidence. He's like, there is no, and he was laughing. And the way he was doing, there was so much ego involved in what he was saying. I was like, wow, this is not how I would picture an Egyptologist laughing. Well, that got me curious. I started getting into it. Why would anybody think like that? And then I realized, oh, these guys write books and they teach lectures and they teach classes based on this information that they're teaching. And now this information has been shown to be not true anymore. When Dr. Shock was showing this water erosion, he was saying that this was all before the discovery of Göbekli Tepe. And once they discovered Göbekli Tepe, now they know that there is a sophisticated structure capable of massive stone circles that was 12,000 years ago, at least, when it was intentionally buried. So it could have easily been several thousand years old then. We don't know. But we know at least 12,000 years ago, someone was capable of incredible design and incredible stone structures with three-dimensional animals carved into these stone structures, which is very sophisticated. Now, has that guy been talked to since then, and has he amended his position on it?
As far as I know, he hasn't. And I know Lehner reasonably well. We're civil to each other. And it won't be long now. I mean, he's one of the generals of the in the army of the idea whose time has not yet gone. And his time is coming up pretty shortly.
Does he
I think.
address Göbekli Tepe? Now, I mean, because his whole position was there was no civilization. What evidence is there? Well, now that you have this evidence, what does he say? Well, maybe.
I haven't actually spoken to him, and I don't know if anyone has. I see him in Egypt every once in a while. I don't know if anyone has. And I ran into him fairly recently. We just said hello. And I don't think I'd necessarily want to bring it up with him off the record. I'd rather have him with the cameras on it,
right,
and just see what happens. But
right.
Otherwise, he's a dead duck.
But it's just so he seems to be just clinging to this idea because he can. Like mainstream academia hasn't accepted this predating of the Sphinx, or also the difference in the structures, like the difference in the construction methods that were used. One of the more fascinating things that you sort of highlighted in your Ancient Egypt series, Magical Egypt, which is fantastic, and I highly recommend it to anybody who is even remotely curious of this. You will be sucked in an incredible way. It got to the point my wife was walking by the TV. She's like, Jesus Christ, you watching Egypt again? And I'm like, it's like 6 discs. It goes on forever. 8. So there's a clear distinction between the older methods of construction and the newer methods. They use different methods. Yeah. And it's really obvious to someone like me who's not even, I don't know anything about it, but you could see the difference. And also that these older structures were below the newer structures. Like you had to dig down to get them.
That's right, yes.
Like the fact that they don't address that, the fact that that's like they want to lump this all into the same people is kind of crazy.
It is, but as long as they can get away with it, they will continue to get away with it. As I said, the second strongest thing in the world is the idea whose time has not yet gone, and anybody who doesn't, let's say, among myself and my colleagues who are all in this, let's say, the quest to prove, to demonstrate that the advanced civilization existed in the very distant past, which is, in my case, in some other cases, not necessarily, but in mine, it's because that opens the door in and of itself. It doesn't affect the price of eggs. But on a much more profound philosophical level, once it's understood that understanding that civilization goes back way much, much further, leads to the understanding and the acceptance that our role, our destiny as human beings is to achieve immortality. This is as simple as that. Otherwise, it's just a head trip. In other words, if it's not understood that we have a role to play in this grand cosmic scheme, there's no civilization possible.
What do you mean by that? Our goal is to achieve immortality. Do you mean as individuals, or do you mean in what way?
That we arrive at a level of consciousness that is not subject to the death of the physical body. All of religion is based upon that. All of the stories of the saints and the rishis and the masters and so on is based upon, all of it is based upon their experiences that have led them to this understanding. If it's just a head trip, it's no good. It has to be part of your very being. The purpose of sacred art is to, and of sacred music when it works, is to communicate, even if only momentarily and fragmentarily, this understanding that there's something else. And speaking from my own personal experiences, I've never gone through a full-blown mystical experience, but I've had lots of these moments, particularly in Egypt, in a long study, and these moments in Egypt where there's this sudden realization that the world as it manifests to our faculties, our normal faculties, is not the only world. There's something else beyond that, which was understood a lot better in those days than now. And actually, funnily enough, I forgot to mention this, but I don't know if you know this. I've been spent the last couple of years sort of sidetracked from my regular work, working on a book written by a friend of mine, good friend, who was not a writer, so I helped him with the editing and contributed to it. And this is maybe the definitive book on NDEs. You know what those are, right?
Near-death experiences.
Near-death experiences. He was a Christian pastor, a rare guy who actually lived what he preached, named David Solomon. And as he had collected all of this material, a huge amount of material, that he was trying to systematize, because this is now, it's certainly not a common experience, but there are like 5,000 verifiable accounts of people who have been clinically dead and who have been revived, usually through modern methods, because now one of the reasons why it's now so common, and before it was reserved for the saints, the great saints and the mystics, that modern medicine has improved to such an extent that if you get to these people quickly enough, any number of people who are clinically dead for X number of minutes, not 2 days, but minutes, sometimes more extended period than that, come back with these tales of this realm beyond that of the senses, a realm of higher consciousness. Basically what it is, what they've experienced is grace. In Christian terms, it's grace. It's a moment, and they come back transformed. They come back convinced that everything that they were doing before is either nonsense or unimportant, and they often come back with a mission, even though they don't have the schooling, let's say. They don't understand philosophically or spiritually what they've experienced. They know what they've experienced, and they laugh at the debunkers who are saying it's all hallucination of the brain, dying brain. This is all garbage. What they've experienced, and David put these together in a systematic fashion. And then, as he collected all this material, and I was telling him, he's a good friend. He financed our trip to Göbekli Tepe 5-6 years ago. And he started losing his balance, and he was a Tai Chi guy who knows a lot about balance, also a bonsai master and a Christian pastor, unusual guy. And he started losing his balance, and it wasn't going away. And the doctors finally figured out what was wrong with him. And he had a glioblastoma, something, I forget, something. Do you know what a glioma is? It's a form of brain cancer that is 100% fatal. It's the only thing you have is you can't determine the timeline. And they gave him something like 10 months to 12 months to live. He actually lived 3 years. And at that point, he had all of this material, and I told him, when he was telling me about it, I said, hey, I should write a book. This is really good stuff. The way you're doing it is not like anybody else has ever done. And he said, no, I'm not a writer. I'm just doing this. And then when he found out the diagnosis, then he had a mission, which was to get the book out. But he wasn't a writer, so he drafted me in to put the words in the right order. And he lasted just long enough to get the book finished and get it published. And it's really... If this went viral, it could make a difference. He was very good at titles, David. It's called The Dead Saints Chronicles, subtitle, a Zen Journey Through the Christian Afterlife. And it really is an absolutely extraordinary book. And it becomes quite clear when you go through this that what people have experienced is a state of grace that's not all the same. I mean, some people it's more profound and some people less so, but all of these people are unprepared for what they've experienced, and all of them come back transformed. And of course, the quackademics, this is one of the ways they protect themselves. Peer review is one way, and the other is their insistence. Who the hell gave them the right to make the rules from science that apply to science? Or they're scientists, so that gives them the right to make the rules? No, the rules are the rules. And one of the chief ways in which they protect themselves is to insist that anecdotal evidence, personal experience, doesn't count. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't buy a cookbook by someone who's never fried an egg. So these are guys who've never fried a spiritual egg, and these 5,000 accounts are people who've actually been there to this superior realm and come back to talk about it.
No, but you say you haven't had a mystical experience. You mean the psychedelic experience?
No, that I've had, yes.
You've had psychedelic experience. Yeah. Which kind of psychedelic experiences have you had?
Oh, I've done ayahuasca, and I've done, you name it.
Right. So then you've done DMT?
Yes, and I've done not mescaline, but the other one, acid.
Okay.
All of those. No, the experiences come actually from me. As I said, they're not a major it's not the state of grace that these people are talking
You
about.
didn't experience the state of grace when you did DMT?
Not quite. No, not compared to what the NDEs.
Can I ask how many times you've done it?
One.
One time. Okay, did you do a lot of it?
I don't know.
You got to do a lot of it.
Yeah, maybe.
Did you just dissolve? Did you go to this crazy geometric infinite universe where you're creating?
I didn't.
You didn't get in there then.
I didn't get in there. I didn't need.
How long are you in town for?
Pardon?
How long are you in town for?
Only till tomorrow.
We'll have to make something happen. You gotta go deeper.
Yeah, maybe.
That experience that people are having, a near-death experience, is mirrored by the same experience. I'm sure you're aware of Dr. Rick Strassman.
Oh yeah, sure.
Sure. I believe actually was in.
He's on the.
That's right.
I never met him when Chance was doing this.
Brilliant guy, and so important because what he has created by his book, DMT, the Spirit Molecule, they did these clinical tests giving people DMT in a clinical setting and at the University of New Mexico. And what they found was these people achieve this incredible state of understanding, a more relaxed vision of the future. They're more confident, like the idea. I mean, this is also mirrored by some of the Johns Hopkins tests that they've done with people with psilocybin, where people have, they have just a much better outlook about the future. They don't think that this is it, and that whatever happens to them when they're having these trips. And the way Strassman did it is much more intense than most people do it, because they did intravenous doses, which last longer. A typical DMT trip lasts only about 15 minutes, unless you just jump right back in, which is what I usually do. But he gave these people the intravenous doses, which to take them just very deep for more than a half an hour. And they all had very similar stories, and similar stories to people that have had near-death experiences. I've had friends that have had near-death experiences, and when they talk about it, it's very similar to the way I've talked to other people that have had DMT trips, where they are in the presence of this divine greatness, this something. So, but that is also a chemical that's produced by the brain. Now, this is where neuroscientists step in and say, well, what you're experiencing is some sort of a hallucination. And they might be right, but it also might be some sort of a chemical gateway that your brain produces when we really don't know. And that might be the way the soul, quote unquote, air quotes, whatever, but for lack of a better word, transitions to this next stage of life. Now, when the anecdotal evidence that you're talking about is measured up, what's interesting about it is similar accounts over and over and over and over again.
That's right.
The people that can remember things, they remember this incredibly divine experience. But the question becomes, is that experience, and this is something that I've been bouncing around in my head a lot lately, is that experience a hallucination, or is that experience an actual real experience in a divine presence? And does it matter? Because is it the same thing no matter what? If you just think you're experiencing God and divine greatness because you're creating it in your mind versus actually experiencing God and divine greatness, isn't the experience the exact same thing? And is our mind locked into the idea of a physical thing, like this laptop? I can pick it up, I can drop it, I know it has weight, I can touch it, I can measure the width. We can't do that with psychedelic experiences. We can't do that with transcendent experiences. We can't do that with mystical experiences. You can't measure them. You can't put them in a bag and take it home with you. But it might be the same thing. It's entirely possible that this is what many, many ancient cultures experienced as well. They found the use of psychedelics very early on. And this is also something that you documented in your work. And they documented it very clearly in a lot of the Egyptian work. They had deep understanding and knowledge.
Exactly, Joe. This is one of the important things about the drugs and the NDE experiences. In my view, the NDE experiences more so because there's nothing in the way. There's nothing obstructing it. They're dead.
Right.
And this is where they go. With the drugs, you're you in these experiences. And the problem, interesting, the problem, it's not a problem, it's the wrong word, but with the NDE experiences, I mean, absolutely, Joe Sixpack, everybody, ordinary people, many of them, some of them even atheists, go through this and come back, literally transform. Their whole lives are changed by it. With the drugs, it really is, for the most part, it's a trip. It doesn't have this, let's say, this lasting transformational value.
It does on some people.
It does sometimes, yes.
Well, the John Hopkins study showed that a lot of people, decades later, had a vastly improved quality of life, different outlook on things, and especially when you're dealing with terminally ill patients.
Oh, well.
When they've given it to terminally ill patients, significant lessening of anxiety and fear of death.
Oh, sure, it would be. But the hallucination, this is another scam by the so-called rationalists who, in fact, are not. They're this idea that it's a hallucination. And what's a hallucination? And what's its evolutionary value? Why should there be where's the hallucination gene? This is all bullshit, actually. And what it actually is not based upon reason as they promote themselves. What it is actually is the rationalization of their own inner emptiness. They can't handle the fact that there might be something else. And in fact, their whole intellectual lives are consecrated to proving that life is indeed as meaningless as their own.
But is that what it is, or is it they're just trying to look at some sort of give it a critical, objective view and go over all the possibilities? We know that drugs do affect the mind in very strange ways. We know some people take drugs and it completely distorts their reality. Alcohol is a perfect example of that, right?
Yeah.
It's a great drug for distorting reality. You can watch someone get drunk and have a very bizarre version of what they're looking at. There's many drugs that change the way people look at things, like physically, the way they see things. They will hallucinate. They do. So we know that drugs have an effect on people.
That's right.
I mean, it seems rational, though, that a scientist would look at those things and try to find some sort of a scientific explanation for the chemical process that's going on in the mind, the way it's affecting the visual cortex, and the things that the person is, quote unquote, hallucinating.
Underlying that contention, which is not science in and of itself, that is just a hypothesis. Mm-hmm. That is speculation. And I said what it is based upon is protecting their own vision of the world, which is that the universe is an accident, and anything that is mystical or so-called spiritual is hallucinatory, and they have the answers. And these people, as far as I'm concerned, are more dangerous even than politicians. They are. Put it this way: the Church of Progress is the religion of the emotionally defective, the spiritually dyslexic, and the philosophically depraved. But to put it into other terms, you actually, martial arts master I studied with briefly, used to say in his Japanese accent, if you want happiness in this crazy world, you do not talk about moonbeams to the blind, or moonbeams to the blind, music to the deaf, and you absolutely do not talk about sex to eunuchs. They just get angry, and this is what you're dealing with when you're dealing with these intellectually based scientists. These are spiritual, emotional, and philosophical eunuchs, and it's no surprise when they behave the way they do. Who's surprised? Who's surprised when the eunuchs snigger behind the sultan's back, and deride his passions? The problem is that with our Church of Progress, when the eunuchs take over the palace and call their terrible disability reason, then the empire's cooked.
You sound like a person who's been deeply in the trenches against academics for years. You sound like a bitter man, John Anthony West.
No, I'm not bitter. I'm not bitter. I'm just realistic. And I know what's involved from being in the trenches. I know what's involved in fighting this particular battle, which I've been engaged in all of these decades. And
yours, because you've been dealing with archaeologists. They're trying to refute evidence.
They're all just as bad as each other. What I bring to the table, that my colleague Graham Hancock was an excellent writer, and some of the others who are very brilliant people. Rupert Sheldrake is also a very good friend and a very good scientist. What they are not is satirists by nature, and I am.
Now, let's go back to this idea that human beings need to fulfill immortality, or that is our ultimate destiny, to fulfill immortality. What do you mean by that exactly? Because if there is an afterlife, right, if we do die and then we go to this other place that people are seeing in these near-death experiences, why do we have to do anything? Why can't we just sit around and wait for our physical meat body to stop working and then transcend?
Well, this is, again, this gets addressed in David's book, in the Dead Saints Chronicles, because it's our job to transcend. In other words, if we don't do anything, well, something happens to us. And again, here's where the near-death experiences get interesting, because almost none of them are negative. What happens to the real evil monster people that are out there in this world? I mean, does Dick Cheney go to heaven? Gee, if he dies, I don't want to be there.
That would be hilarious. Imagine if you get to heaven, you're like, Dick fucking Cheney's up here. You got to be kidding me, man. I should have done so much more.
I mean, he's in the special waterboarding division where they have...
Well, maybe he just, realizes it.
No, but seriously, this is the purpose. You'd never know it from listening to these guys. This is the purpose of religion. It's a practice. It's not something you believe in. It's something that you do. And if you don't do it, you don't, unless you go through an NDE, and you come back and you start doing it in one way or another. But it's my own personal conviction is that unless enough people are doing this and getting somewhere with it, it's not as though everyone's going to become enlightened. They probably aren't. Again, going deep into the whole theories of reincarnation and return and so on, which is part of Egypt and part of all of the Eastern cultures of reincarnation. No, chances are you don't make it in one lifetime. But these things, let's say, there's a report card. There's a divine report card where these things are measured. I mean, Jesus says, insofar as, the Bible is a scholarly morass, and I usually try to avoid using it as evidence for things because it's so open to interpretation and it's so convoluted to begin with, and who knows what's original to it and what isn't. But, many are called, few are chosen. But those who are called, who do their work or who try to do their work, reap the benefit of that on an internal level that the academics can't measure and don't want to measure and don't believe can be measured. But somebody with a presence is very different from somebody without any presence at all. You see that in the world around you as you go.
Yeah, I want to bring you back around, though, because I'm still confused. What do you mean by it's our goal to achieve immortality? Like, what do you mean by that? Do you mean like the physical body no longer dies? And do you believe that, like, whatever I read, I do not remember what I read, but what I read about the earliest depictions of the pharaohs, that they lived an extraordinary length of time, similar to like Noah. Like Noah in the Bible was 600 years old when he built the ark, correct?
Something like that.
Something like that. And that this is a common thing. And now, is this because the way we think of time, they had a different interpretation of it, and what 600 years is to us is not 600 years to them? Is it like in the Quran when they talk about 72 virgins, when the expression 72 virgins is not really 72. What 72 virgins means, well, it's interesting because it's 72 again.
That's right.
What it means is a large, it's like a shitload, like someone saying a shitload. You'll have 72 virgins in heaven, like, oh, whoa, what am I going to do with all them? It's just a large number. It's the actual, it's not the actual number 72. It's just sort of a euphemism for a large number.
That's one of the theories of all of those different strange numbers in the Bible, and I don't know any better than anyone else. As far as I know, the pharaohs lived ordinary lifespans, and of course there's no physical evidence of the pharaohs, the Netzeru, when the divine rule is ruled, and the Shemsuhor when they ruled. There's none of that, and we simply don't know. The Tibetans have accounts, if you want to believe the Tibetans, and I tend to, I don't see why they should lie, of great lamas who live several hundred years and go when they choose to. I don't know, as simple as that. And actually, you might say it's no more than a kind of mental, it's an interesting hypothesis like Bigfoot, but who cares? The only thing that actually counts is the inner work. And if you're doing it, you're doing it. So, and if you're not doing it, and you don't measure yourself either, as soon as you're looking for results, that's already a way of not getting them. It's a very delicate and yet profound subject. And if you go to a good Zen master, this stuff is still around. There are masters. My own focus, as you probably know, or maybe you don't, is the Gurdjieff work, because when I came across Gurdjieff, an extraordinary character, he was the first person I'd ever encountered posthumously. He died in 1949, and I found out about his work in the 1960s, who was as contemptuous of Western civilization as I was. The difference was that he knew how to live in it, and I didn't. And at a certain point, I figured out, particularly what you're talking about before, that my life in the trenches, good subtitle or something.
I still don't understand what you mean about achieving immortality. So if you're not talking about physical immortality, you're not talking about someone living 1,000 years and plus.
No, absolutely not.
What are you talking about? You're talking about the ideas that they promote, transcending and moving on?
I'm talking about a level of consciousness that transcends death, that the body dies, and that understanding is where you are. I mean, the drugs do that. You have these moments that with the body, you come back because you get out of the trip. Let's say it's an eternal trip, and the ancients talk about that all the time, even in their mythology, which is always taken as fanciful. Let's say in the pyramid texts, the script reads that when the pharaoh dies, and the pharaoh being, let's say, the embodiment of the realized and enlightened soul, when the pharaoh dies, his ba unites with his ka, his spirit unites with his essence, becomes a star, and travels with Ra across the sky in his boat of millions of years. And in fact, I've often wondered if the Egyptians actually knew what he was being, what they were talking about, and the stars themselves are the realizations of enlightened souls. It's as good as any other explanation that they're simply balls of gas. How did that get there? That automatically, at some point, accidentally coalesce into galaxies and nebula and universes, and the whole thing goes on meaninglessly.
Well, I don't think anybody thinks it's meaningless, but it is kind of fascinating that stars themselves are the only reason why people are alive.
That's right.
Like we are made of stardust, which is just
we are indeed
incredible to think that the seeds of human life and all carbon life, in fact, come from a star exploding. Like, wow. Like everything that you see, like the sun is a seed for future life.
That's right.
That's bananas.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, that you've answered your own question, as it were. That understanding, and I wouldn't even call it a philosophy. It's an understanding by people who understand more than we do, certainly more than I do.
Right, but if you say that's our goal to achieve immortality, that sounds like we're going to get it anyway, no matter what.
Well, no, actually, with the NDEs, no. What happens? No? Not really. No, they've had their experience. They've had their X number of minutes of grace, and come back. Transformed, and realize that they have to live their lives differently. They don't even talk about the future or anything like that. I mean, this is obviously a very big thing that not many people evidently achieve. But the effort, like everything else, the effort is the effort, and it's on the scorecard. It's like it's not so different from everybody who picks up a violin isn't going to end up in Carnegie Hall, and everyone who picks up a baseball bat isn't going to play center field for the Mets or any other team. But it's the effort that counts, and it's a certain kind of directed and intelligent effort that is painful in its own way, but carries its own reward, and it manifests in a kind of presence, and just in our daily lives, even with people who are not consciously doing it, but they're doing it, they have a different level of presence, and you notice it when you meet them.
Could AI help you do more of what you love? Workday is the AI platform for HR and finance that actually knows your business. We help you handle the have to-dos so you can focus on the can't wait to-dos. It's a new Workday.
Now, what is it that you think these ancient Egyptians, when you talk about the earliest Egyptians that you believe had achieved this incredible state of mind or consciousness, what is it that you think that they did to achieve that? Like, why were they so advanced? Why were they so beyond what we think of when we think of even the possibility of a human being living 34,000+ years ago? Like how did they achieve that?
We don't know.
We don't know.
We don't know. All we can see is the manifestation of what they did when you really understand Egypt, even to the extent that I do, you regard it as miraculous. You don't see how beings ostensibly like ourselves should even imagine such things, much less be able to do it. And this is what I'll pitch my trip.
Okay.
I often start a lecture off by saying that Egypt is like sex. That gets everybody's attention. Why is it like sex? Because you can read books about it, and that's informational of sorts. You can look at pictures, that's a different kind or a different level of information. But until you've experienced it, you do not and cannot understand it. And Egypt is like that. That Magical Egypt series is as close as anyone has ever come to communicating the wonder and the magic that is Egypt as anyone has ever. It's way head and shoulders above what anybody else has done. And that's my genius partner Chance is doing in its entirety. It's, symbolist ideas, and I play a big role in it, but it's really Chance's baby. And but at the visit to Egypt, at the end of a couple of weeks there, I can talk from now till doomsday, which I'm about in the process of doing. And nothing that I say can come even remotely close to what it's like to be 2 weeks in Egypt, day after day after day after day, in the presence of sacred art of this quality. And there's nowhere else on the left. I mean, I'm sure that China and India and all of these places had not pyramids and not that kind of structure. The nature of Egypt, it's strange. It's a kind of freak of nature, as it were. All desert except this little strip of Nile. And then the delta that until recently was impenetrable swamp. So it's practically unattackable. And the Nile floods, and the food jumps out of the ground, and with a series of genuinely enlightened rulers, or at least pretty close to enlightened rulers, ruling them, that all lasts for 3,500 years. And how did they live? You see everything that they did. In fact, until quite recently, there were no such things as jobs. There were trades and crafts and skills and arts. And everybody, I mean, yes, in Europe, the combination of a repressive church and an oppressive nobility kept everybody, immersed in serfdom in one way or another. But what people actually did with their lives was, in some sense or another, transformational. All of it. It takes a lot of smarts to be a good peasant. All of these things that people used to do as a matter of course. And in Egypt, you see it. You see it carved into the walls, and everyone thinks these are the scenes of daily life. Well, they are scenes of daily life, but they're decodable as transformational activities. So anything that you do, and boy, you're doing martial arts, this is a highly developed skill. You are somebody that you wouldn't be if you didn't have that skill. If you were doing a podcast and what you did for a living was flipping burgers at McDonald's, you wouldn't be Joe Rogan. You've been doing your homework without maybe even thinking that it was homework. Because anything that you're involved in that you go at with a quest for perfection of whatever it is has this transformational value. And when you recognize, when you know it, let's say when you know it intellectually, when you can articulate it, it implements the activity itself. So it's possible even to do that. You could be an enlightened burger flipper, and the Sufis are very good at. The Sufi is in life, but not in life, but not of it. In other words, you can practice waking up, as it were, in the midst of the most mundane thing. You could be an enlightened garbage collector, as long as you knew what you were doing. It's a totally different thing. I would imagine. I'm not a garbage collector. It's a totally different thing to collect the garbage consciously than it is to just do it resentfully because that's the only job that you can get. Although,
right.
So when we're talking, it's not as though this is anything actually new. It's the oldest idea that ever was, and it's something that people have been doing for thousands and thousands of years. That said, going into the whole thing of precession and the ages, particularly as expressed Plato, they have the Golden Age and the Silver Age, and the Bronze Age and an Iron Age. The Hindus do it in rather more sophisticated fashion. I forget exactly the names; they're on the tip of my tongue. Of those ages, but if they are, let's say, analogous to our seasons, particularly if you live where I do and not in California where it's all one season, but the seasons.
The very easy. Is that it? The yugas?
The yugas. That's right. It's if they're compared to the seasons, it's a very different thing to grow roses in June than it is in January. It's the same effort when you're talking about people, about waking up and all of the rest of it. This is a dark age. I mean, this is the Kali Yuga as far as I'm concerned. To do anything of a spiritual nature now with all of these forces lined up against you, not consciously, of course, but unconsciously, it's an incredibly difficult thing to actually practice a genuine spiritual doctrine. First of all, you have to get interested in it, and that's only a small chunk of us, and then you have to try to do it.
And you have to have the time, you have to have the focus.
Well, make the time and the focus, and that's right, the focus and the will and all the rest of the things. And so growing roses in January takes a lot more effort than to get to the same rose than it takes in June when they're jumping out of the ground. So my guess is, and it's only a guess, it's speculation, that in these higher levels of these higher periods of gold and silver, bronze, and so on, it's just much easier. It is much easier for people to recognize what's demanded of them and to do it than it is in the middle of a from a spiritual point of view, spiritual but brightly lit, unilluminated but brightly lit dark age.
Well,
where we are.
If you look at the influence that Egypt had clearly on Greece and clearly on a lot of other civilizations where people literally came to Egypt to learn. If Egypt wasn't there, what would civilization be like? I mean, it's such a unique place in that there's really nowhere that you can compare that has the level of sophistication as far as the structures in the ancient world. There's not even, I mean, it's almost like what they created was undeniable. Like I think Giza, the Great Pyramid of Giza has 2,300,000 stones that weigh between 2 and 80 tons.
Yeah.
Like what? Like how? That's insane.
It is.
Like there's the level of sophistication in creating something like that. I mean, I've only seen it in photographs, but one of the greatest photographs I've ever seen is from someone with a GoPro standing on the top of it. So you get this kind of a sense of how immense it really truly is.
Yeah.
And you just think about how incredible that must have been especially when it's covered with smooth limestone before they cut it all off.
Right.
I mean, what you're seeing is it's an undeniable mastery of physical things to the point where it makes your head spin because people say we can do that today. Well, okay, maybe we kind of understand that it's been done and that we can do pretty immense things. We have some pretty incredible tractors and machines and everything like that, but they didn't have those. No. As far as we know.
They didn't have those. They might have had something else.
What do you think they had?
I don't know. I mean,
do you have like some hypothesis, some theories in your head about the construction methods?
A bit. That actually from Tibet, there's actually a funny little book. I've done some lectures out at what is it called? In Joshua Tree. You know about that? Mm-hmm. About it's a contact in the desert. They're mostly interested in the UFO phenomenon and stuff like that. But the place itself, Joshua Retreat Center, is founded by a very interesting guy who was sort of the Tibetan Krishnamurti. In other words, it's an interesting little book he wrote, terribly written, but his studies in Tibet. And at the end of this little book, he's talking about, he's studying with the lamas. He describes certain of the things he has seen them do. And I see no particular reason to dismiss what he says. He's talking from experience, and it has the ring of veracity to it. He talks about going into an underground chamber that has no lights or electricity or anything like that. That's all lit up. And when you go to Egypt, you have these deep, deep shaft tombs that go down and around and all like this. And people say, well, how did they light the thing up? Can't have had torches. It would have used up all of the oxygen, and it would have smoked up the ceilings and all the rest of it. And people say, well, mirrors. No, mirrors will do. And you need silvered mirrors to go around corners. There are the gypsy caves in Seville that have 4 or 5 rooms and that are lit with mirrors from on top. But no, somehow, and I used to joke and say, well, they had an inner light. Joking, but maybe that's what it was. But they produce this, and he talks about other lamas he's witnessed doing incredible feats that you couldn't do, that you just couldn't do in your ordinary state. Probably you, as a martial artist, have had moments or witnessed people who can do things that are, for anybody else, impossible.
Yeah, but they don't light up tunnels.
No, they don't light up tunnels, but they can do physical things that are
they're extraordinary.
They're almost miraculous. That nobody else could do them.
Yeah, but it's a really important point what you're saying about the construction methods that they used, where they did have these long tunnels and these passages and these places, but somehow or another they managed to navigate these things without leaving any marks or soot from torches, which are everywhere else where people used candles, or anywhere else, like, even the Sistine Chapel, like the entire ceiling is covered with soot. They had to clean it, to prepare it so people could see it again. But that's really fascinating to think that they had some other method of illumination that we just haven't discovered yet. We don't know what they did or how they did it.
That's one thing, but you look at a jillion other things. Particularly, this is again one of the reasons why the Sphinx theory is so contentious to these, so dangerous to these guys, because the Sphinx, carving the Sphinx is one thing, but okay, limestones are relatively resilient stones, right? Relatively soft stone. Enough guys with chisels, even if they're copper chisels, could do that given enough time and enough genius. But the temples either side of it are built of stones half the size of this room, slotted into place like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. This is unbelievable.
And again, what you just said is really important. Copper tools.
That's what they think. Copper tempered with arsenic. I mean, but those same copper tools are supposedly used for carving the granite. If you go to Egypt, actually, you should get a huge audience. Get a Joe Rogan trip together and come on to.
I'm not going with people listening to this podcast.
Well, have a test.
Too many freaks.
Well,
90% of them would be great. That 10%.
We'll keep out the 10%. It's just prepare a...
I have to have a filter. Have a conversation with them.
Prepare a filter.
Get them in a room.
Prepare a filter. And...
How many people would you take at a time?
I have a max of 24.
Interesting.
Because more than that is unmanageable.
Right.
And when you see it, I mean, one thing after the other.
And it's totally safe to go to Egypt right now?
Well, it's as safe as Los Angeles. I mean... or anywhere else here in Pakistan. It's, this is for Americans to, of all people, to be afraid of going
Well,
somewhere.
we're worried about Islamic terrorism more than anything, because
it's here.
Yeah.
So it's already here. And Islamic terrorism is itself a tiny little bit of the terrorism that goes on a daily basis. You open the internet, and there's some nutcase kid somewhere or another shooting down a mall. I mean, the known terrorists have accounted for it's not even a statistic. It's an X number of people that they've gone after. But here in this crazy, violent country, you're never safe anywhere. Schools aren't safe. Malls aren't safe. What's safe?
Right. So Cairo has some nice hotels too, right?
Oh, great hotels. Yeah, we stay at a place actually right across a stone's throw from the pyramids itself.
So you can look at the pyramid out your window?
Yeah, you can.
Wow.
That's right. You can do that.
When I look at the Great Pyramid, or I look at the structures that I've seen online or in your videos or things along those lines, what's shocking to me is how, and this is going to be a weird thing to say, how Egyptian it looks, and how Egypt stands alone in this very distinctive way. And that the construction methods, just the intricacy of the building, and these pyramids. I mean, people talk about the Mayan pyramids, and I've been to Chichen Itza, and it's an amazing place, and it's really beautiful and crazy to look at, but it pales in comparison to the structure.
Meet the new iSims, the single talent acquisition platform that's fully future-ready. It works wherever and however you hire, with insights no one else offers. One solution that fits seamlessly into your existing tech stack, which is why IT and HR leaders trust it. With the best of enterprise-grade software and AI, iSims helps you identify and secure the right talent faster. iSims, powering exceptional hiring. Learn more at isims.com.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Pictures of Egypt.
Yeah, everything pales in
so
comparison.
What happened?
With it.
How did that happen?
Well, as I said, because it was in a kind of a blessed one. It had a philosophy. It had a spiritual philosophy underpinning it that united the people in their entirety. It doesn't mean that there weren't, criminals and murderers and stuff like that, but basically the people were united in their faith, united in their belief. Herodotus, when Egypt was 6th century BC, Herodotus, and Egypt is already in steep decline, says the Egyptians are the happiest, healthiest, and most religious of people. And wasn't the Egyptian Chamber of Commerce that was telling him to say that. He was a patriotic Greek. But it was like that, and it was a combination of the philosophy wedded to in a society that was protected on all four sides and almost impregnable. It was conquered a couple of times over the course of 3,000 years for a relatively brief period of time. And the food jumped out of the ground. The Nile flooded and took practically no work. And that made a quite substantial population. It gave them months of free time every year. And
so how did it all go wrong?
Now we're talking about the Kali Yugas. Whatever period Egypt is assigned to is on a downhill slope. It just plain was on a downhill slope. And you can watch it transform in front of your eyes. It disintegrates as a coherent religion, rises in another form that we call Christianity, actually. And you can see it happening in front of your nose with Coptic Christianity arising. All the rest of the stuff gets completely decadent under the Romans. And in Rome, what's his name? Edward Gibbon, in Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, talks about the grandeur, the glory of Greece, which is absolute nonsense, or totally near total nonsense, and the grandeur of Rome. Yeah, they were building colosseums in order to torture, in order to let gladiators kill each other, and they built good roads. But Rome was a three-ring bureaucracy, actually, and that's the beginning of the end. In Europe, anyway, it's very traceable. The Asian countries less so, but they too have high civilizations that decline. And in Europe, you see kind of a turnaround in the Renaissance, very impossible to actually date. And then you have it leading in a very one-sided development in which technology advances by leaps and bounds, and everything else is arguably a lot worse than it was a couple of hundred years ago. From every spiritual, psychological point of view, we're a lot worse off than let's say, the colonial Americans.
You really think so?
Well,
But the depictions of the colonial Americans by the ancient people, when you who was it that described the atrocities that Columbus and his crew had done? What preacher? That priest?
Oh yeah, no, loads of them, sure.
Yeah. They had done horrific things.
Oh, those are the conquerors. Yeah, I'm not talking about the settlers who murdered all the Indians.
Right.
Oh, and the
Cortez.
Right. This
and
already
all that stuff. Montezuma was a piece of shit. Slaughter of 80,000 slaves after they built Teotihuacan. How do you say that?
Teotihuacan.
Teotihuacan.
This I don't know about, and I don't know again.
But they seem like bad people too. Right?
Oh, loads of bad people around.
We just didn't have the internet.
No, but I'm talking about they certainly didn't have the internet and lots of other goodies they didn't have. No, but there was a certain, let's say, about the populace in general in America, a certain gravitas about them. There's a certain presence that is of our great-great-grandfathers. Well, not mine, because they were in Hungary at that time, my great-great-grandfather. But there's a certain sort of like Emerson self-reliance. I mean, this is a piece of it. Meanwhile, of course, they're whopping all the slaves in the South, and they're murdering all the Indians, and the billionaires, as is their fashion, are beating up on their Irish immigrant workers. That's because why have slaves when they can mistreat their workers and build build all of their railroads across the country. But nevertheless, there's a sense of, as I say, gravitas is almost the only word I can think of, because it's not as though it's intellectually advanced or anything like that. But there's a certain seeming solidity to 19th century America